I subscribe to the Daily Telegraph to keep an eye on what they're reporting and so that I can see comments and add my own comments. They did a very good article on Stella Morris and Julian Assange and their children. They wrote it themselves. Now, we can always find something negative in anything that's in the media, mainstream media, but I was expecting worse.
I saw the BBC story. The BBC is not a fan of Julian Assange, though. It definitely wasn't positive. They basically insinuated that, that while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, that he was having sexual liaison.
I'd call that negative, Chris.
Yeah.
The Sydney Morning Herald had cut and pasted was by the Washington Post reporters. There were two, Ana Vanessa Herrera and another lady, Hannah Knowles. And I looked them up on Twitter and I saw that it had their email addresses. So I sent a polite email just correcting some errors. There was a tweet by Anthony Albanese yesterday saying that journalism isn't a crime and journalists shouldn't be prosecuted for just doing their job. Labor will always defend press freedom. There were 269 replies so far. And out of all of those 269 replies, I would say 95% brought his attention to Julian Assange's plight. So there were so many people going back to Anthony Albanese, just reminding him that there is an Australian journalist who's on remand, hasn't been found guilty of any charges, who's locked up for journalism. So Anthony Albanese should put his money where his mouth is and start standing up for an Australian journalist being held in
Maybe I'm thinking I'm going to send my letter to him. I'm going to send my email to him reminding him of his duty as the opposition leader to bring the government to account on their failure to act on this matter.
You know what that reminds me of? I'll tell you what it reminds me of. Do you remember the Sunday morning program on the ABC? What's it called? Insiders.
Insiders, yeah.
And one of their hosts was Barry Cassidy. He retired from it sometime towards the end of last year. But I remember Barry Cassidy hosting a show, an Insiders program, in which they were talking about press freedom in Australia, and they referred to Anika Smethurst and other Australian journalists, but never once in that entire episode was Julian Assange's name mentioned. And never once. I'll never forget it. You can go back over the files of Insiders sometime towards the end of last year, before he actually retired, and they were talking about press freedom, and everyone there was on the face of it in support of press freedom, but it made their kind of support for it. It contradicted their support for it because they failed to raise Julian's case, which made it all their comments more contemptuous, right? And even if Albanese says that he's in support of press freedom, he doesn't really mean it. He doesn't, because these people have shown hostility to Julian over many years.
There are, right? So will be, he's not a journalist, therefore it's irrelevant.
Yeah. And and the other thing, just remember another thing, that WikiLeaks revealed that within the Labor Party, there are agents of the US government in the Labor Party. And if you remember the WikiLeaks revelations from 2010, so in the removal of Kevin Rudd, there were 4 members of not only Labor Party, but trade unions in Australia, and I'll name them. They are Mark Arbib, there was David Feeney from Victoria, a senator from Victoria, Paul Howes, who was a member of the Australian Workers' Union, and there was one other guy, maybe Bill Shorten as well. But those people were exposed by WikiLeaks as having collaborated with the US government in removing Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister.
They were called the faceless men.
Yes. And so, you know, and you know, I can tell you, and if Albanese is not one of those conspirators, he definitely knows of people inside his own party that collaborate with the US government. And that's why they haven't defended Julian Assange at all.
He would not be leader of the opposition unless he was collaborating.
Yep. 100% I agree.
When Greg Davies was working on Dateline on SBS, and he interviewed a young fellow at the time of this happening, a fellow called Christopher Boyce.
Yes. You're talking Mark Davis. Mark Davis.
Oh, Mark Davis, yeah. Sorry, you were right. It's Mark Davis, yes. And that really opened up my eyes to what is happening in this country. We're not controlled by Australian parliamentarians. We're controlled by the CIA, basically. And Mark interviewed Christopher Boyce, who had gone to jail in America for telling his friend actually tried to sell some information about how the CIA had brought down the Whitlam government.
Yep.
And he was helped by the Labor unions.
Yep.
And headed by Bob Hawke.
Exactly.
And Christopher Boyce actually said he was guarded because he didn't want to go back to jail.
That's
in
right.
His 60s. And he said, I couldn't believe when they made Bob Hawke Prime Minister of Australia, because Bob Hawke was just a puppet of the CIA. And unfortunately, I believe our unions in this country have been compromised ever since.
Yep. I agree completely, Karen. Mm-hmm. Completely agree with that. That's a good description. Yep. Spot on.
So I'll send you that link because
I saw that program.
Really
it's a brilliant interview. I've shared it on my Facebook page several times. It's a brilliant interview. I remember I used to live in rural New South Wales a few years ago, right? I won't say the town, but I'm a trade union member. I am a member of a trade union, and I went along to my association meeting after having seen that program, and I spilled the beans on them. I told them the substance of that program, that brilliant interview by Mark Davis with Christopher Boyce. I went there and I just spilled the beans. And some people didn't like it, but I said, you should watch the program and listen to first-hand testimony from Christopher Boyce, right? And it was a brilliant interview. Some people didn't like it. Some people did. I remember one lady came up to me after the meeting and she just wanted to speak to me privately about what I had seen and what conclusions I had drawn, and she was in complete agreement. And then once you have those kinds of revelations, everything else starts to fall into place. You can start to explain why certain behaviours occur. There's no conspiracy, right? Because you have substantive material that can shed light on who these people really are and who their loyalties are to. Mark Davis is a great journalist. He's a lawyer now. He's a barrister now, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he's one at the ABC anymore.
No, I don't think he's getting many gigs on the ABC or anywhere else very soon. But I also went to the Toxteth Hotel where he spoke in Glebe in Sydney. They had politics at the pub, and he was coming to speak about Julian Assange. And that that interview is available on Consortium News. So I'll also send you a link for that because it's very interesting. Because he was with Julian at the time, and he was telling us how Julian was the one that redacted the names.
Yes, I saw that.
To protect people. And it was the Guardian team that had given out the password.
That's right.
So that the names were revealed. And he was saying there's no way Julian should be in jail. If anyone's going to be in jail, why aren't the Guardian team in jail? And he also showed how WikiLeaks were having some issues publishing the document, and it was the New York Times who went with it first. So why aren't they in jail? Why is Julian in jail?
That's right.
When they're not in jail, why aren't Der Spiegel's people in jail? Why aren't the Guardian people in jail?
I think I agree with you, Karen, but we just have to be careful. Journalists should not go to prison.
Exactly.
Should not go to prison for stop.
None of them should be in jail.
None of them should go, right? So none of them should go to prison, right? Publishing is not a crime. You have to be. I'm very careful how I phrase those statements, right? You know, we're not saying that other journalists should go to prison. No, we're just exposing the hypocrisy of the state, right? The hypocrisy of the state, which makes an example of one for something which is prevalent throughout the entire industry, right?
Yes, I think his point was, why are they sending one man to jail for doing something that other people have done? And I totally agree. Of course, none of them should be in jail, but it is hypocrisy, as you say.
It is hypocrisy, yeah.
And I think a key point was that the other Guardian journalists were quite happy for Julian Assange or WikiLeaks to publish those papers unredacted. They weren't at all concerned about redaction, whereas Julian took it on himself to do the redaction.
Well, this is not a political issue. This is about a bunch of gangsters that are running the free world. This is about a bunch of gangsters that have control over all politicians. They have control over all the media. They have control over all the legal systems, right? So really, our enemy is not the legal system. Our enemy is not all the mainstream media. Our enemy is not all the politicians. Our enemy is this bunch of gangsters that are running the world and carrying out these wars for their own gain and ripping off the assets of the countries they're invading, which is the primary purpose for them perpetrating the war in the first place. You know, it's like a global organisation of bikies, but instead of running around on bikes, they've got air forces to do their bidding. They've got drones. You know, they've got the control of all these countries, including the United States of America. So we've just got to be careful to identify our enemy. And, you know, as I keep banging on about, it's the 1%, you know, it's that handful of bloody evildoers.
Well, they're all faceless people. We don't know who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't even know their names. You know.
Donald Trump is just a little puppet.
I wrote something on my Facebook page.
Let me just finish if you don't mind. And all the politicians and the media and the judiciary, they're the 4% I've talked about. You know, they're on the gravy train and they defend the 1% because the 1%, you know, feed them on the gravy train. So they've got beautifully feathered nests, so they hang in there. But when the 95% convince the 4% that they're on the losing side, that heads are going to roll. You watch, they'll turn tail quicker than you can, you know. And we've seen that before. We've seen that in the past, how quickly they turn tail. So, you know, we've just got to remember who the real enemy are.
I wrote something on my Facebook page this week. It talked about the story of Christian Smalls. Are you familiar with him? So Christian Smalls.
Oh, yes, from Amazon.
Yes. So he was an employee of Amazon on Staten Island in New York City, right? He raised the alarm amongst people about the existence of COVID. At the warehouse where he worked in New York City, there were workers there who had been struck down with the virus, right? Anyway, and he basically said, look, you know, well, this facility should be shut down, right? Because it's a health threat to everyone who works here. Anyway, so he lost his job for calling a strike. He wanted to call a strike, and he lost his job. In the wake of that, what happened was Amazon organized a smear campaign against him. They were prepared to slander his name in the media in order to shut him up. But he beat them to it. So he went to online media, he went to the Jimmy Dore show, he went to other independent broadcasters online and YouTube, and he got the story out before the smear story started circulating in mainstream media. He beat the mainstream media via social media. And then after this story broke, I just wrote a couple of lines on my Facebook page, and I said, look, you know, what is it that Christian Smalls, Chelsea Manning, and Julian Assange all have in common? They all expose the crimes of the 1% of the billionaires, right? They all expose their crimes, right? Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon and also the Washington Post, Barack Obama, George Bush, Hillary Clinton, all of these people were exposed as criminals, right? And they're rich and free. Meanwhile, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and Christian Smalls either lost their jobs or lost their freedoms, you know? That story it just brings everything out to light, right? It brings everything out into the open. And I mean, I think that to me is a political story, right? Because it talks about who has power in our society and who does not. You know?
And again, with Bezos, he has connections to the CIA through Amazon as well. So there's a web of people who are connected.
Yeah.
And they protect each other and make sure that, they try to paint a different picture than the truth. And we are lucky we do have people like Julian and Manning and Smalls now who are willing to take that risk, because it's a huge risk these people take, these whistleblowers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, so they're such brave human beings, and I have so much admiration for them, and that's why I really feel I want to do what I can to protect those people who have done so much for us.
Yeah. Exactly right, Karen. It's incredible bravery. You're putting your life on the line. You should watch that interview. Go to the Jimmy Dore show. You go to the Jimmy Dore show and just type in Christian Smalls. It's a really moving interview. He breaks down, right? Because he's got a young family. He's a young African American, right? With a young family. Guy hasn't got a job now. He put his whole life on the line to reveal the corruption of Jeff Bezos, right, and Amazon, and the whole the whole mainstream media. It's riveting. It's really sad viewing, but it's heartbreaking.
It is. Yeah, I did see it as well, Petra. Yeah.
I like the Jimmy Dore show.
Me too. He tells it like it is. I love his passion.
Yes.
He's right.
Yeah, he tells the truth, right? And he tells the truth. And that's why he says, you know, I love his definition of journalism. His definition of journalism is that you look down the street, right, and you say exactly what you see without any bullshit, right, without any lies. You call it exactly as you see it, right? No bullshit. Yeah. That's journalism.
The final sentence in all my letters to all the politicians. Failure to act is an act of complicity with those that are perpetrating this barbarity. You know, like, and because that's what Julian's doing for us all. At the end of the day, he's identifying the bad guys. And as long as we don't stand up for him, we're a bad guy. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm standing up at Town Hall. I want a big, you know, cross on my forehead to say I'm on Julian's side, because I don't want to comply with our powers to be, with our media, with our politicians, with our judiciary. You know, they are all in their complicity, in their silence. Their silence is their complicity with these evil acts.
I remember watching The World at War when I was a youngster, maybe 11 or something.
I used to watch that.
Yeah, it was narrated by Laurence Olivier.
Yes.
And I remember watching as a very young, impressionable child about how the Jews were treated, and I could not understand how this could happen. And I became obsessed. And I would read books, you know, in my early teens about, you know, the Jews and World War II and what happened, because it just blew my mind. I couldn't understand how good people could let this happen. And so I agree, Tony. I don't want to have my grandchildren saying, Nana, you know, when they were doing this to Julian Assange, you know, what were the good Australians doing? What were the good people doing? And I want to be able to say, well, I tried. You know, I don't have much power, but at least I tried to speak up.
Yeah, you've described my childhood as well. That's exactly what I remember watching those programs. And I too, I became very political when I was very young, like not even as a teenager, like even in primary school, I used to read about World War II, right? So I remember I remember being in years 5 and 6 and going to my school library, and I would take books on non-fiction, particularly the war section, right? And I remember going up to my librarian at school, and my teacher, she would see the books that I was borrowing. She said, look, you know, why don't you borrow a novel instead of these books on war? And I said, and I remember once, okay, I took a novel, but I never read it. I just read the history books, right? And that continued right through high school. And I was always interested in history, and particularly asking myself that question as well. I became older later, and I started asking questions like, why did that happen? How did it happen? And the only satisfactory answer I came across was when I started reading Trotsky. Because Trotsky opened it up for me. He opened up how ordinary people could do such evil acts, right? And then it all made sense after that for me. But Trotsky was the one. His method of elucidating, of describing, of explaining was supreme, absolutely supreme. But I don't know, like I turned 53 this year, right? And everything I've believed in pretty much from a childhood, from a young child, has been confirmed, you know. I've just become more aware of it, that's all. But the depth of that understanding is the only thing that improves with time. But that understanding has never been contradicted by events. Yeah.
And I think going back to what you said, Tony, how our society, or the American and Australian society, isn't about everyone, the we, it's about the me. I think that's changed as well. Like, my parents didn't have the me attitude. It was much more we. And that's how I was brought up, not to think of yourself. Like, if there's a piece of cake, you always take the smaller piece. If a friend comes over to stay, you give them your bed and you go and sleep on the lounge. You know, it was a different mindset. And I think slowly we've come to the me, society. And some of us are fighting against that, and we're still the we society. And I think it's, again, something by design to try and get people to think of themselves rather than the community.
Well, I think what's changed things in Australia is, I think fear is being used to control us. You know, we're all aware of this attempt by the people in power to control us through the use of fear. And I think fear is when you stop worrying about your neighbour and you start worrying about yourself. You know. And
Good point.
But I don't think all is lost. I think the point I'm trying to make with the COVID response is, we haven't been quite as idiotic as America in our response. We have, made attempts to think about the we, to think about the health workers, to think about the old people in the old people's home. I mean, even Scott Morrison himself, when asked by a journalist, look, all this is going to basically, in a nutshell, the journalist said, look, all this is going to do is kill a bunch of old people in nursing homes with chronic health conditions, should really be destroying our economy for their stake. And Scott Morrison, without thinking about it, said, look, I'm not going to start prioritising Australians. I'm not going to say that an elderly person in a nursing home with a heart condition is any less valuable than a newborn baby. And I thought, well done, Scotty, nobody scripted that for you, or maybe they did.
A politician, God. That's all he...
No, but I think the reflection of our society's more been in our response to this heavy-handed, let's face it, I'll be the first one to admit, it's heavy-handed closing down. And we haven't, essentially there hasn't been a whimper. The footballers are saying, this is un-Australian and stuff, but essentially we have complied. And
yeah, I feel that it's terrible that we've complied.
Well, I mean, yes and no.
We should start using our brains instead of letting some politician just dictate how we are supposed to think.
No, but listen, at the moment we're under a state of emergency. There are powers...
Exactly, and we shouldn't be. That's my view.
Okay, but now the most powerful minister in the parliament is the Minister for Health, and he can enact things without consultation with other ministers. He has got power within his own ministry. It's like a war. It's like wartime powers. It's like during a war, the Prime Minister has
And we're
power.
not at war.
So you believe that the 10-odd thousand deaths in New York City are through other causes?
They are through causes which may include the coronavirus, but there are no more people dying than would have died in previous years. And if you look at all the statistics that people have got, that is how it is. But they are recording deaths wrongly.
There's a lot of medical staff dying too.
Yes, there are medical staff dying. There's lots of people dying, but they're recording the stuff wrongly. There was a story about a young, he was testing, he said, he was a young physician, and he said it was more like, it wasn't like a flu, it was like altitude sickness.
Yes.
This was in America. And the guy, Wolfgang Wodarg put out an urgent message saying, this is what happens when you take hydrochloroquine, is it something like that?
Yeah,
Donald Trump was recommending. If you take that, there are people who have a genetic
predisposition
to respond to that drug with all those symptoms. So, you know, there's a lot of nonsense being said, and people are dying because of the nonsense. We need to get to the truth. And that's what Julian Assange is all about. We need to get to the truth. And the epidemiologists are the most likely people to have the truth, not politicians and not media heads on TV.
I watched that program that you sent me, Steve. I watched the one by Witkowski, you know, Newt.
Yeah.
I watched that, and yeah. I must say, I was impressed by what he said, but I'm not an epidemiologist. But one of the I read the comments threads associated or that followed that video, and there was one particular comment that kind of resonated with me, and it was that it would have been fantastic to have him, Witkowski, present his story and then be interviewed or have an exchange with another epidemiologist, right, who could either provide further insights or further insights which might not necessarily agree with his conclusions.
Karen sent me a video which I think everyone should watch, the Corbett report, and he's got Newt Witkowski, but he's also got other ones like Professor of Stanford University, they're the people who should be being consulted. They understand what it's all about.
But Steve, they're in the process of discovering this virus. This virus is a couple of months old.
Well,
we know bugger all about it.
Know all about it. That is for sure.
Sorry?
But that's one of the things. You don't act on fear. You act on what you understand is going on. And they're not collecting the data properly. They're only testing people who are at risk of dying. And then, well, the tests that they're using, they don't know, they haven't been validated. So they don't really know how well they work. And so it's all, and the only way to do it is to look at the total deaths, and the total deaths are not any different from previous years.
The most beautiful thing is in a couple of years, we can look back and say, and compare the way Vietnam handled it with the way America handled it, with the way Australia handled it. And we can say, oh, maybe that was an overreaction. What they did in Vietnam was an overreaction. You know, they didn't really
Assuming
have
a free press. Assuming a free press.
No, well, I have enough faith in the medical research organisation to think that they're going to do the best. And I quite frankly believe we're in the hands of the medical profession. I don't believe that politicians are getting in, particularly in Australia. I think Scott Morrison is smart enough to realise he's got to step aside and let the medicos handle this. And whenever you see a press conference, he's always got the chief medical officer beside him, and he's referring the questions across to him.
Well, I know that the statistics that they're reporting are absolutely nonsense. I thought, well, I need to look at what the epidemiologists are saying or the, experts are saying. And I found this Wodard guy, and I thought what he said made very good sense. But now there's about 30 of them who are saying exactly the same thing, and they're top people.
I just know that I don't understand or know what to believe. And that quote I was trying to remember last week was Winston Churchill once reportedly said, "The only statistics you can trust are the ones you've falsified yourself." And Disraeli said, "There are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics." And upset because I really don't know what to believe. I think there is a new coronavirus, and it is really hurting people, but I don't know what to believe as far as the way that the statistics are being given to us, and the way that we've just shut down the country and obeyed what to do so well. And I know that the Americans, as a government, the people pulling the strings, don't really care if a few 100,000 people are going to die. And yet they all jumped to the same tune all together, all at once. All I know is that my spidey senses are going off, and I just don't think I want to take Billy Gates' vaccine anytime soon.
So I've drawn these conclusions. One, we need, I agree with Steve that we need honest journalism, because honest journalism would be our informer here, okay? And when journalism is compromised, when there's no trust in it, it means that people like us, people like me, an idiot who knows nothing, will probably never feel confident that he is getting an accurate picture. So honest journalism is absolutely critical. That's the first thing. Secondly, I do believe in science, and I believe in open and fair discussion, open inquiry, and asking questions. And I do believe that epidemiologists know more than I do about the spread of diseases and viruses and pandemics. But there has to be open inquiry and free inquiry. That's another conclusion I've drawn. Thirdly, that this virus has exposed the impossibility of life under capitalism, because in the development, if a vaccine were to be developed, right? If a vaccine were to be developed, it would be subject to profit strictures, profit demands of corporations, and therefore it would not be, there would be some people who would have greater access to it and others who wouldn't. That's another conclusion I've drawn. Another conclusion is, if we assume that close proximity to each other is the way that the virus is spread, that is borne out by the fact that communities who are poorer are more likely to suffer from this disease. For example, in New York City, it's the African Americans and Hispanics, the poorer members of our societies, who cannot afford to live on their own because of sky-high rents, who are forced to live with each other. That is where the virus is. And the virus, for me, it does exist, right? Because doctors have identified it and have died from it. Not just doctors, but nurses in cases where, Like, I've never known so many doctors to die in such a short period of time. Like, that to me is a parameter that needs to be investigated, right?
Yeah,
and not just in America, in Italy. I acknowledge, and here's another, I acknowledge that there's debate at the moment, right? I acknowledge that. I'm certainly not someone to question an epidemiologist. I don't have the authority. I don't have the education. I don't have the knowledge to be able to do that, right? I don't. And so here's another thing, right? That instead of resources being directed towards really understanding and addressing this on a global level, Trump sends the military against China, right? So that is when we need greater levels of resources directed towards the healthcare of the world, towards the health of the entire world's population. That is not happening. Instead, they're weaponizing this case. I wrote something on my Facebook page this week about the level of hatred towards Chinese people in Australia, right? I've belonged to several Facebook groups, and it's disgusting the things that I've read this week. People calling for the murder of Chinese or Asian people on Facebook. It's absolutely repulsive. I've seen so much of it.
Hello. I saw your kitty there, Tony. Very cute.
That was the best thing about seeing Stella Morris with the kids, was the cat.
Yes.
Julian's cat. Because that was one of the first things I thought of when he got taken. I thought, what about the cat?
I thought the same thing. I was so pleased to see the cat on her lap getting a pat.
Now, what an angel she is.
Yeah. And it's awful that she had to. I think the reason she came out was because that Judge Vanessa Barrister refused to grant legal anonymity to protect her and the kids. So I thought she's probably trying to get on the front foot before this smears. Yeah.
And the CI already knew who she was.
Oh, they would have, yes. Yeah.
No,
I'm trying to take.
Julian would have advised her to come out for her own protection, because once the world knows about her, they can't,
easily. Yeah. And the little boy.
But the secondary part of her coming out would be to get media attention. And and that is what has been lacking in the last week. I just cannot believe the media silence. They'd all, all the journos would be chafing at the bit to get a story on her, because that'd sell newspapers like nothing on earth. But they're prepared to forego newspaper sales because behind the scenes they've been told to shut the whole Julian Assange thing down, keep it out of the
That's more important.
Yeah.
And that little boy looks so much like Julian, little Gabriel. He's adorable. Thank you.
Yes, it was a bit of a worry where the poor cat was going after. But
well, that was when I saw him being dragged out. I thought, who's got the cat? He's
already made plans to send that off, or earlier. They sent the cat got put in a place earlier, but it was a worry that the poor cat. I mean, it's more for Julian's sake that the cat was like keeping him alive in that time when he was more or less in solitary confinement in the embassy.
Hi, Pedro. I agree with just about everything you said then, except for one thing.
Go for it.
You're no idiot.
I believe. Let me assure you, Karen, I am an idiot, right? can I tell you, one of my favourite jokes, I love the Marx brothers. I love Karl Marx, but even Groucho Marx, right?
He's a different brother. I think he's a cousin.
Right? Anyway, but, there's a great Marx brothers film called Duck Soup, right? It's absolutely brilliant. I think it was made in the late 1920s or early 30s, and it's a wonderful film. It's worth watching if you can get a hold of it. But there's this one scene, right? So it's Groucho Marx who pretends he's the lawyer, and he's representing his brother. His brother's Ciccolini, right? Anyway, so Ciccolini's the defendant. It's a great scene. You can check it out on YouTube, right? Type in.
Okay.
I think I've seen it.
You may have seen, but the joke is this. This is the joke, right? Your Honor, look at Ciccolini here. He looks like an idiot. He sounds like an idiot. But don't let that fool you. He actually is an idiot. Those guys were comical geniuses, right? Groucho especially. Groucho Marx he was a comic genius, like with Charlie Chaplin. But Groucho Marx was phenomenal.
Yeah,
absolute genius. He had everything. But you should watch that film, Duck Soup. It has some really strong political themes, right?
Okay.
Very, very political. They were very political, right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
that Duck Soup. There's a few other ones. A Day at the Opera, right?
Yes.
A Day at the Races, right? Those films, they were phenomenal films. But Groucho Marx, the guy was so funny. I could and watch the film Duck Soup, because
All right. You're no idiot. My favourite was always Harpo. I think it was the hair.
Yeah. Oh, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, look, the thing is, right, that there's two aspects to this whole COVID thing. There's one, the biological, which I really can't comment on, right? Because I'm not a doctor and I'm not an epidemiologist, right? I'm not. But I can't comment. But I can comment on the social aspects of it, on the political issues around it, on the economic issues, right? And one thing I'm saying, and I think we all agree with this one, right, is that every event that occurs, whether it's an economic or a political or a social or natural event, at every event, the powers that be, right, they take opportunity of that event to strengthen their own hand against the people of the world. That is unquestionable. That is beyond debate, right? And on that one, there's no question at all. And yeah, I know that these social distancing rules, you're talking about now inserting cards subcutaneously, like below your skin, right? Like that stuff is horrific. Or monitoring your movement, sequestering people, preventing them from contact with people who are not supposedly infected. That really is scary stuff, right? That's scary. They're monitoring your whole movement and preventing you from coming into contact with people who may not or may be infected. But Steve, this is my thing, right? I can't comment. I'm not a biologist. I'm not an epidemiologist. But I've never heard of so many doctors or nurses dying. I haven't. That's a parameter for me. That's something that needs to be explained. How is it?
I can't.
That needs to be explained. How is it that so many doctors who are working with these patients, right? And I can understand the arguments of the epidemiologists. I can understand that. I heard that video of Witkowski. Like, he was very convincing. He didn't sound like a charlatan at all. He was very professional in his responses, right? And yet there are some facts which I wasn't, which still need to be examined, such as why is it that so many doctors and nurses are dying? And so many are.
The thing is, how many are dying this time and how many died previously in previous years? We don't know everything. But what is clear is that the statistics that are being reported about deaths is absolute nonsense, because it's just like hundreds of deaths, 1,000 deaths, but there's no way to know how they're recording these deaths, what they're doing, and they're not comparing it with the whole population. So they're just they're just testing people who are close to death. And they've got a test that's an unvalidated test that could be getting a lot of false positives. There was a Chinese study which has been withdrawn that showed that the test was producing a lot of false positives, but it was withdrawn. So we don't really know. But you know, no test is foolproof. And there also the thing is, people are dying, but people die of lots of things, and they may have a virus in them that they didn't die of. This is a brand new virus that they've discovered, and it may be what's causing their deaths, but they don't really, you know, like it seems that it's debatable even that. I expect it is causing deaths, but there was a thing on the Irish website, the Irish government website, how to record a death. It's only if you suspect that they may have, if COVID-19 was involved within the last month or something. It's only something like that. It's so vague that it's going to inflate the numbers of deaths that are being reported as COVID-19 deaths.
Okay, let me put another proposition to you, Steve, because I agree with what Petro just said, and we all agree that the government is going to lie to us. You know, that these statistics are not cast iron, they are statistics, and in effect, they're all lies. You know, there isn't probably one of these statistics out there that's an accurate statistic. Bearing in mind that we expect lies from our politicians, as much as they might over-report as a lie to achieve an end, they are more likely to under-report. And I've seen quite interesting YouTube clips where they reckon that the real death toll in China from COVID-19 is closer to 2 million than 3,000. And I'm inclined to believe that, in fact, the death toll in China is a hell of a lot more than 3,000, because they admitted to 80,000 cases, which I also am inclined to believe is a gross underestimation of the number of people that are infected, bearing in mind how quickly it spread around the world. So as much as you might be right, Steve, and this might be a gross overreaction, you also may be wrong. And I think you've got to accept the fact that you may be wrong. And in fact, this may be a gross underreporting of the situation. And maybe that's why some countries have come down so heavily and closed their borders so quickly and closed their economies so quickly, because they know that really the situation is a hell of a lot scarier than the statistics that are officially available would indicate. And that, in fact, the situation on planet Earth is a lot worse than is being admitted to by all our politicians. And it may be being done for a very good, it may be being done so that we don't panic and that the veneer of civilization evaporates very quickly, because you've got to remember in a situation like this that law and order is a very, it's something that can disappear very quickly. And when it disappears, things really go to shit, It's more than toilet paper becomes a difficult commodity to get your hands on. So, it's in the interests of the 1% and the 4% of the politicians and newspapers to keep the world in order. And to keep the world in order, they may be lying to us by underreporting. So I just put it to you, as much as it may be a situation of overreporting, it may in fact be a situation of underreporting. They're two equally viable alternative propositions.
Yes, but from a scientific point of view, you don't go with conspiracy theories, you go with what you know. And if the data is incomplete, we need to get complete data. We don't want to jump to conclusions and crash the economy when we have incomplete data. And that's, if you haven't got evidence, you can't really say something, and you don't, okay, we need to burn, we're in a boat, we need to burn the boat to survive from, some pestilence that's on the boat. But somebody says that, and, it could be true, but I don't think most people would want to be in the middle of an ocean without a boat. It could be true, but you would want to know it was true, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I don't believe in conspiracy theories either. I believe in conspiracies, but not conspiracy theories. Yeah, we need evidence. We need substantial links, cause and effect links, right? Yeah. That's why science is so important, and that's why honest journalism is so important.
And why scientific journalism, as Julian Assange was embracing and doing, is so important. You back up with what you're saying with evidence. We have to at least call into question what's going on, since there are so many top people, and they're really at the top, saying that they don't understand why we're having this flattening the curve stuff. Then there is this thing of registering what's a COVID-19 death compared to another death. And that seems all very vague, and how they're openly wanting to have as many COVID-19 deaths as they can find.
Just last week, there was the case of Crozier, who was the captain of the USS Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah.
COVID-19 was detected on the warship. So it was docked in Da Nang, which is a Vietnamese port. But Crozier, he went around the chain of command. He didn't go to the president. He went to other members. He wrote an email to other members of the senior Navy, in which he described the incidence of the COVID-19 virus amongst the sailors of the warship. He called for the ship to be removed, to be quarantined. Trump would not allow him to. In the end, the Secretary of the Navy, a guy called Modley, sacked the captain of the aircraft carrier, right? Because he wrote a letter going outside the chain of command. That is, he went around communicating the situation on that aircraft carrier to other officers within the Navy, right? He demanded that, the captain of the ship demanded that people be removed from the ship, that it be quarantined, that it be removed from service until the virus was removed from the entire ship. That to me suggests a number of things. One, the fact that he was sacked shows that America is still projecting a very aggressive military stance in the Western Pacific against China, right? That's undeniable. But it also suggests that the fact that Trump refused to give permission to the captain to remove sailors from the ship, right? Because he wanted to maintain this war presence in the Pacific, right? But the fact that the captain recognized that the ship was in danger of falling to the disease suggests that it was very real, because he had a mission to achieve, right? His mission is to continue putting a lot of pressure on China, building up the military pressure in the Western Pacific against China. But the fact that he was prepared to sacrifice that mission for the safety of his own sailors by calling out the disease on the ship suggests that this disease is actually real, right? I mean, that's what it would suggest to me.
I've been watching some videos from a Dr. Paul Cottrell over the last few weeks, and he's a doctor of mathematics, I think, not a medical doctor, but he lost his brother to a heart attack a number of years ago, and he made the decision to change his stream of income, and he decided to become a medical doctor. So he's studying medicine at Harvard, and he was talking about how as part of his studies, he's been studying viruses, and he was actually studying the Wuhan virus prior to the outbreak in America and around the world. And he keeps changing what he thinks because they keep learning new things by week, day by day. And I think what Tony said about looking back, you know, in a year's time or month's time, hopefully we'll know more. But at the moment, there's just more questions than answers.
Yes. And my point is that if we don't know, doing something drastic like crashing the economy is not a wise thing to do.
And I think it goes back to what Tony said, or maybe Petra, where he said it's all about having control. These people...
I believe that that's the case. I believe they've dumped on it as a means to establish greater control. They saw it as an opportunity.
That's what I think as well. I
don't think they wanted to crash the economy, because the economy for them is a source of profit, right? It's a source of profit for them.
But aren't they siphoning off?
Oh yeah,
all people's money and taking it to the rich people?
So one of the first things that Trump did when the pandemic was declared a pandemic on the 11th of March, right? That was when Dr. Ghebreyesus from the World Health Organization, he declared a pandemic on the 11th of March. On the 12th of March, Trump basically enacted what they call the CARES Act, which is the coronavirus stimulus package. And in that package, it was literally handing over, through what they call open market operations, the purchasing of something like $4 trillion of treasury bonds, treasury bills from the Wall Street banks. In other words, they literally gave, with no oversight at all, $4.5 trillion to the Wall Street banks. That was the first policy response by the Trump regime. That's the first thing they did.
And what does that mean to the people of the country?
Sorry?
And what does that mean to the people of the country when that money goes?
That's a great question. It means this, that Wall Street banks then use that money, that liquidity which has just been provided to them from the taxpayers, literally from the US government. They take that money and they go buying assets which have collapsed in value as a result of this economic recession. So you can imagine there's all these economic assets right around the country and around the world that are now have lost so much value because they're in a recession or a depression. They're not trading, but the banks have been given all this cash to go and buy those assets up, increase the concentration of economic power, right? Increase the worsening or exacerbating the disparity of income and wealth in the country and right around the world, and putting people in absolute misery. So that is the impact of that. And not a single cent of that was dedicated to medical care. You know, in a country where, if you're talking about a pandemic, the first thing, if you're going to talk about addressing the needs of the people, the first thing you do is provide universal health care, right? That's the first thing you do. Unconditional health care to every human being. And yet they haven't done that at all. You know? No. So, you know, not a single cent. So now they had to backtrack a bit because of the rage which is occurring in the American population. There's a rage. You just have to see or follow the pages on Facebook and social media. You'll get a glimpse of it. So where the other day, the minister, or sorry, the secretary for health, forget his name, or I forget the secretary for the health system, they basically said they're going to pay for every coronavirus-related medical expense for only US citizens, not for people who are not, so not for undocumented people, right? So they're going to pay for that for every medical bill related to administering or treating someone that has been declared a sufferer of the COVID-19 virus. But that's only a minor, it's only like a minor step. They're not giving universal health care. They're not, right? They're only providing funds for this particular type of treatment.
And there are people who were going to have an operation or some life-saving surgery that have had that put off because of the COVID-19 thing.
Yeah. So a case to look at is the Elmhurst Hospital in New York City. It's been dead. They've removed every patient who does not suffer from the COVID-19 virus out of the hospital. It is now a completely dedicated facility for the treatment of COVID-19. You know, the whole thing has been turned into a COVID-19 treatment station. And the bodies are piling up. They're piling up.
Well, these bailouts that the governments around the world are doing, they're giving the cake to the corporations and the crumbs to the people. And they've seen that happen before after the GFC. And so they've seen that happen when the banks were bailed out.
Yeah.
And the people lost their homes. So that's why people are upset. They know the drill.
They sure do. Yeah. They gave, Barack Obama gave more money to the banks, you know, and so many people, 5 million people were made homeless in about 2008, 2009 in the United States. And some of those people have never had a home since. It's just shocking, just absolutely, it's disgusting. And so,
they were fine. The corporations were bailed out. Their CEOs kept getting their millions, but the people on the ground, they were the ones losing homes.
Yep. You know, it's. In fact, if every single person that was thrown out of their home had been given the amount of money which was required to pay off that mortgage, it would have been cheaper to do that than to give the money to the Wall Street banks. Would have been cheaper. Would have been cheaper, more financially efficient, more cost-effective to give those funds, which were given to Wall Street, to pay off the mortgages of those people who were thrown out. But of course, they can't do that because it's a system that benefits the capitalist class, right? Finance capital. Yeah, the American elections have Sanders won. There's a couple of things about Sanders. One, he's a very loyal servant of the American capitalist class. He never once defended Julian Assange. He has backed Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. He's a lapdog of the Democratic Party, a thoroughly criminal organization, right? People have this wrong conception about the Democratic Party. But if you look at historically and objectively what they have achieved, I'll list them, right? It was the Democratic Party that dropped the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? It was the Democratic Party that began the invasion of Vietnam. It was the Democratic Party that bailed out Wall Street, right, in 2008. It was the Democratic Party that imprisoned Chelsea Manning and went after Julian Assange, right? The Democratic Party is a thoroughless capitalist organization and enemy of the people.
Yep. And they pretend to be the friends of the working class and the middle class, and they're not. They're the party of corporations.
Absolutely. And the state and the CIA and the NSA, all of them, right? And people have this idea that the Democratic Party are, you know, I don't know where they get this idea from, because of the civil rights movement in the late 60s, right? But, you know, I don't buy it, you know. It's a thoroughly reactionary organization, and I want to destroy it.
And how many people actually vote in an American election?
About 50% vote.
Right. So about 25% vote for the Democrats and 25% vote for the Republicans.
Yep. And basically what the Democrats have made, and if you look at their voting record is consistent with the Republicans, right? They supported the extension of the Patriot Act. They supported the handout to Wall Street. They both support, right, the prosecution of Julian Assange, right? They support the war machines, all of them. They support the militarization against Russia. They support the provocative acts against Venezuela. They support the doctrine of Monroe, which is that the South America and Central America are the playfields exclusively of the United States, right? Both of them supported the arrest of Max Blumenthal. Have a look at Max Blumenthal's reporting and why he was arrested. He was a great journalist. Are you all familiar with Max Blumenthal and his reporting on Venezuela?
Yeah.
Right? So they both, you know, both the Republican and the Democratic Party are enemies of the people. Enemies of the people. And I'm out to destroy them. Yep. Out to destroy them. No, I don't mince my words here, right? Both these organizations deserve to be destroyed.
The fact that they've put an elderly man who obviously has Alzheimer's or some sort of cognitive issues up against Trump just shows that they have no interest in winning. They only have an interest in silencing progressives and that movement, which we thought Bernie was our hero, and that certainly fell flat. The only person I heard that had actually supported Julian and had said that she would not pursue any charges against him and Manning would be freed was Tulsi Gabbard. And I thought, well, it'd be great, at least if she's not going to be nominated as the leader of the Democratic Party, at least she's talking about issues that we really care about. But they silenced her as well, and then she ended up capitulating and supporting Biden.
Yeah.
She ended up endorsing Biden. I mean, see, everything you said, everything you put forward, and then you betray everything that you said. I mean, what kind of a person are you? You know,
It was very disappointing.
it was, you know, it's like, it's absolutely disgusting. But, you know, I saw it coming. I knew she was going to do something like that. I saw it coming because of the way that she spoke. You know how she kept on saying, you know, that speaking reverentially about the commander-in-chief and fighting Islamic terrorism in the Middle East. You know, I didn't buy any of that, right? I knew she was going to, at the first opportunity, she was going to expose herself as an agent of the American state, right? And in fact, that's exactly what happened, right? So everything, yeah, but you know, a lot of people were disappointed in her. Yeah, they sure were, because she did say, she called Hillary Clinton the queen of warmongers. Remember that?
Yep.
She called her the queen of warmongers. She did say that she would support Julian Assange, but you know, we can't trust these people at all. And it just shows you. And this broke Jimmy Dore's heart, because Jimmy Dore, he really believed in her. He really did. He was heartbroken. He was absolutely devastated. If you look at his shows now, you know, he has changed. Jimmy Dore has changed from the beginning of the year. He has really changed. He's like a barometer for people's hopes and aspirations in the United States. Because when you see his changes over the last couple of months, that's what the American public are going through. That's the American public. You know, and the American public, they're going to be in for a massive shock. You know, that country's heading for revolution. I mean, that's my estimate. They are heading for a revolution because none of their hopes are going to. I had a Facebook friend who posted on her line on the timeline this morning. She said, you know, she was absolutely devastated. One, because Bernie Sanders endorsed Biden, right? She was heartbroken with that. She was heartbroken of the fact that Julian Assange, no one is speaking up for Julian Assange apart from the SEP in the United States. And then she was heartbroken over the fact that, so they've transported a whole pile of soil, topsoil from, I think she lives in one of the southern states, I'm not quite sure, but she lives in one of the southern states of the United States. They transported a whole pile of soil to New York City to bury people who died of COVID-19. Hello, Mags.
Hi, Pietro. Hello. Sorry for my late entrance. Really sorry.
That's all right. But
Very
they
late.
transported through trucks a whole volume of topsoil to New York City, into which they're going to bury the people who have died from in these hospitals, right? Such as Melbourne and so on. But she was heartbroken. She didn't know where she was going, right? And so, but there's millions like that. They have these massive education debts, these tuition debts. They've got no jobs that they're going to walk into, these debts have saddled them for the rest of their lives. Got no job, massive indebtedness, no prospect for universal health care, no prospect for peace, because they're just going to war. That's the constant refrain in American politics. I mean, does anyone even talk about peace anymore? Does anyone talk about peace? The only thing we hear about is war. That's the only thing we hear about. No one talks about peace. No Democrat and no Republican talks about peace, right? And that just means that, you know, if you want peace in America, well, you're going to have to fight for it, I'm afraid. You know, I know that sounds like an oxymoron. In a way,
It
right?
does.
It's a bit of an oxymoron, but you know, I'm like, and that's that's how I define myself. I believe in peace, but I'm definitely not a pacifist, right? I believe in peace, but I don't believe in pacifism.
Now, well, the last openly anti-war president was John F. Kennedy. And I'm old enough, you know, I was 12 when he was assassinated.
Yeah.
And as a sub-12-year-old, I can remember getting moved by his speeches, you know, because he was, you know, instrumental in equality, you know, in racial equality in America, and spoke very, and he was against secret societies and against, you know, there are all sorts of things. And even as, you know, a 10 and 11-year-old, you know, completely politically naive and unmotivated, he was such a statesman that he moved me. And, you know, people say, oh, I can remember when I heard the news of blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, I can go back to when I was 12 years of age in 1964. I remember I was under the shower and the radio was blaring and I heard the news on the radio and I nearly fell over in the shower. And I knew, I don't know how I knew, but I knew that things were changing. I knew that there was, and it was. I mean, that was literally, he was murdered by the CIA or CIA operatives. Yeah. And that was kind of the end.
Gun theory, Tony.
Sorry?
You don't believe in gun theory.
Well, okay. Well, somebody murdered him, you know. Forget who it was. Somebody murdered him. Somebody was sufficiently against that John F. Kennedy as a leader of the United States that they murdered him. Yeah. And I remember...
That's where
I didn't think, oh, the CIA murdered him. I just thought, somebody's killed that man. That man is a great man, a great leader. He says all the right things, and he's just been cold-bloodedly shot down, murdered. And I just, you know, and looking back, that was really the end of democracy in America, I reckon. Yeah. And that's what, I mean, he was a Democrat, wasn't he?
He was.
He was.
Well, that's why the Democrats still have a reasonable reputation. I reckon 50 years later, you know, we all remember John F. Kennedy. Well, old codgers like me do. And you kind of hear about someone like Bernie Sanders and you think, oh, well, he's saying a few good things, you know. And wouldn't it be interesting that if a man with, you know, these sort of libertarian ideas got into power, you know, maybe there's hope for America. You know, I'm clinging to the fact that is there hope. But, you know, Hillary has proved once and for all with her warmongering and her establishment of ISIS and so forth that, you know, that hope does not lie in the DNC. You know, once and for all, any thought that the DNC were going to gallop in and save the world is now long gone.
Bob Dylan just released a song only like a couple of weeks ago. Bob Dylan, and if you can check it out on YouTube. I forget the title of it, but it's it was only released a few weeks ago, and in it's a 17-minute song. That's 17 minutes. It's a really long song, right? And it's about JFK and his assassination. Also, read the comments that people have left on that YouTube site. Read the comments because some people still remember it like it was yesterday, the assassination of JFK.
I'm one of them. I'm telling you, I remember.
You're one of them.
I remember it too, and I must have been pretty young, but I remember it at the time.
The world shook. The whole world shook. You know, it was an event like COVID-19. I'm telling you, the whole world stood up and went, what the you know, it was a big event internationally.
Sure.
When people started to question if it was one man who shot John F. Kennedy alone, the CIA actually coined a phrase, and that was conspiracy theory.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
coined at the
That's
time.
right. Yeah, coined by the CIA.
Yes, to belittle people who would
question. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe I heard that there was about 8 people involved. They all flew in on a plane. One of them was George Bush Senior, and he was pictured there. Very, he was there at the event. It was. I believe he was going to expose or bring down secret societies, and that. I don't know. That might be why they killed him.
That's right, John.
About 8 people involved, at least. All big knobs, all the big knobs, all the big deep state people. So, yeah.
Look, when somebody gets murdered, the first thing the detective does, he establishes who that person's enemies are.
So since JFK got assassinated, then his brother also got assassinated. Martin Luther King got assassinated.
Yeah.
And then there's a few other people like John Lennon got assassinated. They're all mysterious as to or why they did
peacemakers. All peacemakers.
Yeah.
They were all anti-war.
That's right. They're all a bit on the left side. And then suddenly nobody got assassinated.
Malcolm X is another one.
Yeah, Malcolm X.
Malcolm X.
Yes, Malcolm X. And then nobody got assassinated, although there were attempts on the Pope and Ronald Reagan. But nobody on the right has ever been assassinated. But all those left-wing people got assassinated. Very strange.
After JFK was assassinated, he was assassinated on the 22nd of November 1963. In 1965, the Vietnam War was in full rage.
Yeah.
65 was a pretty good year, right? 2 years later, less than 2 years later, bang.
Yeah.
I mean, so to me, there's a connection there that, I mean, I can't prove it. It's once again, but these kinds of connections, you need substantive evidence, right? And
I think that Donald Trump was going to release the final, CIA information on the JFK. I'm not quite sure what it was called, but he was going to release it, but he didn't.
Yeah, there was some items that had been redacted that he was going to release, and some additional papers. And then at the 11th hour, he changed his mind.
Yeah.
Or his mind was changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People got to him.
Yeah.
The CIA got to him.
He was.
Yeah. And the Kennedy brothers did want to break up secret societies, and they were peaceful people. And I agree that there's only the peacemakers that they want to kill, not the war makers, not the warmongers. And one thing that really moves me is as Robert lay dying, his last words were, "Is everyone else okay?"
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Interesting. Who's that? Robert? Bobby?
Bobby, yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Look, all the Kennedys have been killed. They're all dead.
Well, there's a band called the Dead Kennedys, isn't there?
Yeah.
Is there?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them.
It's a punk band, by the way.
Yeah.
And his son, what was his son called? Was he John?
Jack.
John Jr.
John,
so he
John,
got
John.
killed in that plane.
Mm.
But he could have gone into politics, and that was what the expectation of him was. But he didn't. He ran that magazine, and it was called George, and that was after George Bush, and he was going to expose George Bush Senior. And so so they knew. So he was killed. Apparently, he was a very, very competent pilot. So there's no way that he could have got, confused or he was, I don't know what they did, but he was killed tragically.
Well, John Kennedy Jr. went to Ireland. So he was a member of I think he was a senator or something. He was a politician in the United States. But JFK's son, John Jr., went to Ireland and negotiated the release of Jerry Conlon, who was, he was the Dutchman who had been set up and framed for the terrorist bombings around London that were carried out by the IRA, but he was given the blame, right? He was railroaded off to prison. But Kennedy Jr. was the one who organised a lot of support in Ireland and Britain as well, I think, for his release. And he was released, and Kennedy played a role in Jerry Conlon's release from prison.
Wow, good man, hey? Good man.
Mm.
And
I mean, they were flawed, but I think they also were humanitarians.
I think they were, all of them.
Well, anti-war.
Very much.
I think the thing that connects them all is they're all anti-war. And I think that's what connects them with Julian. I mean, really, Julian's aim in behind all of this is he believes by bringing
anti-war.
The truth, what's his famous quote? All wars are started with lies. So with truth, maybe peace can break out, So really, he's not about bringing corrupt politicians down. Really, his primary motive is to end these insane continuing wars. He's the he's the ultimate.
Well said, Tony.
Well, that's the way I look at Julian. Is he's just an anti? He's like you're saying, Petro. He's not a pacifist because he realizes you're going to have to fight to stop the war machine. And it's going to be a hell of a battle. I mean, he knew that he was going to end up in the clink. Like none of this has come as any surprise to him because he knows why JFK got the bullet. He knows why Mark. He knows why all the. He's not an idiot. He knows that he's up against an apparently unconquerable force, but it doesn't stop him, does it? He's sitting there fighting on.
That's incredible courage, right? How many people have that courage?
Well, it kind of reminds me of that Monty Python skit, with the knight. Doesn't matter how much he gets cut down. He says, come on, I'll have you. And in the end, he's just, he's a head on the ground. He says, step a bit closer and I'll bite your ankle. And
it's only a scratch.
It's only a flesh wound. I mean, that's kind of what Julian's like. He's just unstoppable. Like he's unstoppable. Because all he's got to do is stop doing what he's doing and they'll leave him alone. But the fact that he will not stop is the reason.
No, they won't leave him alone. Yeah. No, Tony, no. They won't leave him alone. No. Because they have to make an example of everyone else.
Yeah, but they'll pick the person who's standing up and trying to expose and stop war. I mean, if he stopped it, he's actually taking, my theory is that he's taking the flak for like everybody else in the world that's on his side. He's I don't know how, I mean, the thought that he's been in solitary confinement for 12 months, and yet when he rings up his best mate, all he wants to talk about is what's happening in the outside world and thank everybody.
I know.
Yeah,
And people call him a narcissist. There's nothing further.
No, hang on. Let's get that clear.
Nothing further from
There's
the truth.
There's one person that's accused him of narcissism, and that's that bitch from hell, Judge, that needs to burn in hell. That bloody...
Oh no, there's others before that, Tony. There's others before that that called him a
Guardian, I
narcissist.
believe.
Who else has called him a narcissist?
I think.
I think
Other
other people, lots of other people.
Yeah.
When he first was dragged out of the embassy and he went to the court, there was a judge there, I think, and even before that, a lot of people, and there's nothing further from the truth about him.
Oh,
absolutely nothing further,
But I think the difference with him is that he's so entrenched now that killing him is not going to be the solution. I think the CIA and the powers to be are smart enough to realise that the time to silence him, the opportunity to silence him, disappeared a long time ago. And now they've got to depend on demoralising him. They've got to just get him to do basically what David Hicks, David Hicks ultimately got out of Guantanamo Bay when he agreed to sign a document that said he'd shut his mouth up. And he signed that document because they'd broken him. They had broken his spirit, and they got him to sign a document, and they shut him up, and he's living as a free man. And I'll bet that same deal's been offered to Julian. I'll bet London to a brick that deal's been offered to Julian. But he just continues to defy it. He's not going to shut up.
And the same with Manning.
Yeah,
She's
I was just
so
thinking.
brave as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That are just awesome. I mean, they're just awesome.
These are superheroes.
Oh, look,
They are.
They are.
Those two individuals give me faith in the human race. The fact that they exist on Earth, the fact that they exist in the time in which we live, makes me feel privileged. I feel a privileged person to be alive when they're alive.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely, Tony. That's a lovely thing to say.
No, I really believe that with my whole heart. It's what gives me. It's what gives me. You keep saying to me, how can you remain so optimistic? It's, and I talk about the 99%, but really it's Julian and Chelsea, the fact that they exist. I mean, it's making me feel good just saying it now, I just can't. The gratitude I have for those two people is just beyond measure. It's just amazing.
Oh, that's wonderful. They're really lovely.
They are.
Yeah.
And
We
it's
are
gonna-
all,
Yeah.
it's a pleasure to know all of you.
You
Oh,
Absolutely.
and you, all of you,
All of
yes.
you.
You're a lovely bunch. You're absolutely lovely bunch.
When we had to stop meeting at town hall, the sadness that came over me was, it was just truly devastating, to make that decision. We had to stop meeting. So I got to take this opportunity to thank you, Steve, for, keeping us alive in virtual space. And continue.
I mean, you're also, everybody really keeping it alive.
To continue documenting it and week after week releasing them.
What is it, 21st week or something?
This is 21. We're 21, folks.
Hey, 21
today.
Yeah.
And we've got 3 minutes, 33
Should have had
seconds.
some balloons. We should have had balloons to celebrate. Well, I'm, I've only just joined you, but well done. 21. That's amazing. It's 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah,
It's starting
No, it doesn't seem that long.
No.
No,
Phenomenal.
But it's kind of sad to think that for 5 months, Julian's been banged up in a concrete.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Devastating.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But at least we're on his side, standing up for the truth.
And he appreciates us being here. Like, I know that. You know, I've heard enough times from his colleagues that every time they meet him, he says, oh, look, can you let everybody out there know that stands up for me, the people that are on our side, that I appreciate everything. So, you know, I can feel that gratitude coming from him. And I think we're an important part of his sanity. I mean, we've talked earlier about his little pussycat was an important part of his sanity. And obviously Stella and the 2 little boys are a very important part of his sanity. But I think we can all take a little tiny drop of that gratitude too, because, you know, we're what keep him going. You know, our vocal nature and our letters to our politicians and stuff. He's so grateful for.
Yes, I wonder if we ever got our letter.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
the letter.
our letter. Yes. I hope so.
Hope we got it.
Okay, people, I'm going to sign off. I'm going to go.
Yeah. Bye.
Yeah.
Have a
Okay.
good week, everyone.
We're all having to go. 1 minute and 21 seconds.
Okay,
Oh,
well,
I'm
perfect.
going to go though, because I've got things to do.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.
All right, bye.
That's it,
Sarah.
Pedro.
Bye,
Bye.
Tony. Bye, Max. Bye,
Yeah,
Karen.
yeah, bro.
Bye, Steve. All the very
See you
best. Free
next week.
forward to the world
Yes.
socialist revolution. There you go. There's a revolutionary in every one of you. You don't know it yet.
Yes.
You'll come to realise it.
I know, I realise.
I think anything will change without
Yes.
the people on the
A lot of
street.
people changing. I tell you what, a lot of people right around the world are changing because they have to. The world does not correspond to the way they thought it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, people. Take care. Stay safe.
Okay.
Stay with
Yeah.
tables.
And all right, Pietro. See you next week.
Later, mate. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, we've got less than a minute.
Well.
So
Okay, I think we should
Just take
say,
a
Okay.
rather than just get cut off, let's actually say our goodbyes this time.
All right. That's